ticklish business any way you look at it. Come on, we'll stick together.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this very special bonus episode of Ticklish Business. As always, I'm Kristen Lopez, joined by the fantabulous Emily Edwards. Emily, how are you?
I'm okay. Anybody who knows me from FBOL knows my feelings about the text that we are going to be discussing today. But I'm very excited because we are going to be talking to someone who is knowledgeable about the Regency and can put everything into context for us.
I feel like I've been torturing Emily the last, 2 weeks, because we did this, and we did Wuthering Heights, another book that I know she is not a fan of. That's not why she's leaving the podcast. One maybe could say. No, but we are going to be talking about the 1940 version of Pride and Prejudice, as well as the new book, Rebel of the Regency, the Scandalous saga of Caroline of Brunswick, Britain's Queen Without a Crown, and its author, the fantastic vulgar history host herself, Anne Foster. Anne, how are you?
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much.
We are delighted to have you, especially talking about Jane Austen. We just did an episode on Emily Bronte, so we've gotten all of our literary big examples done for, I think, the rest of the year, as well as Larry Olivier movies. I do not want to hear a Larry Olivier suggestion for a while after the last couple of episodes. But before we get into that, we'd love to remind everybody our podcast runs purely on your donations, and we do have our podcast network, but predominantly Patreon funds. We would love more of that at patreon.com/ticklishbiz. You get episodes 48 hours early. You get all sorts of fun things. I'm prepping for my TCM Classic Film Festival tour of old Hollywood neighborhoods, so people are going to find out about that first over at Patreon. Head over to patreon.com/ticklishbiz. Just $1 gets you all sorts of classic film related goodies. So yeah, let's first talk about the book that Anne wrote, which I've read it. It's very fun, but also very, very interesting because I knew nothing about Caroline
Look at that
of Brunswick.
cover.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Which I love, having read the book now, the hats that, Caroline of Brunswick was a hat girl. And I think
My key takeaway from your piece of academic scholarship, the hats were fabulous.
The hats were, I think you have a footnote about Caroline was into hats.
She was into hats. She's into outfits. She's into rouge. She loved a strong cheek moment. Yeah.
I love it. You've done so many different profiles on women historically with vulgar history. What drew you to Caroline of Brunswick enough to say there's more to this than an episode of a podcast? There's a whole book.
I'll give you two answers. Firstly, the quick and easy answer is that she was connected to a lot of famous people. So when you're writing, you both write books, and you know that you need to be able to explain your book in a way that people will understand if they're not interested in the specific niche. So it's if you're going to write a historical biography, it needs to be somebody who, if they're not a famous person themselves, if you're not writing about Jane Austen or Cleopatra, it's there needs to be something that people know about. So it's okay, the Regency era. People have heard of the Regency era, and she was married to the regent. So that's kind of a connection there as well. But Jane Austen shows up in the book, Mary Shelley's mentioned in the book. There's she's surrounded by things people know. And I think that's not just for that's how you get a book published, but that's how I can explain it to people. If it's just here's a random person who lived in a time and place you've never heard of, that's a big hurdle to get over. So you kind of putting it in a time and a place people kind of know about, then the door's cracked open a little bit. It's not so much of an ask for people. But the other answer is that I first read about Caroline of Brunswick before I did my podcast, and I was just oh man, this is a banana story. This is a great story. I love this story. And I thought I would like to write a book about her. There's so much to this. But then, as I just explained, you need to have a book that's about a person that people have some connection to. But if you're like me, I was then, before I had my podcast, just a random librarian in Canada. It's just hi, I'm a random librarian in Canada, and I want to write a book about someone no one's ever heard of. It's that's too much of a hurdle. So Caroline of Brunswick kind of inspired me to start the podcast, because I was if I can get a little following, I can maybe make myself more attractive as an author to write this book. So it's been a long grift, and it's finally paid off.
I love that. Book publishing. Often we're resorting to grifting. I think that needs to be the new.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I know that the Regency is super hot right now. Like everybody was
Mhm.
like, oh, Regency romance, Regency this, really. Can you define what Regency is for us who don't do history
Yeah,
stuff?
yeah. So technically, the Regency was a period in England or Great Britain from 1811 till 1820. So like a very short window of
Yeah,
time.
that's not a lot of time.
But that was a period of time where so there was a regent, like the king was too ill to do king stuff. So somebody had to take over from him that was the regent. So that era, like those 9 years, that's the regency where like the king was still alive, but not being a king. The regent was doing all this other stuff. But that's like a 9 year period where like Jane Austen's books are set. Like this is where it's a time period. So you say the Regency, but when people talk about it, they don't technically mean always 1811 to 1820. Like people often start earlier or they go later. Like sometimes, especially in the UK, they call it just like the Georgian era, which is like a
Gotcha.
really good vague statement because there was 4 kings in a row all called George. So
It
you
gives you
can
more meat to work with.
yeah, so you're not just stuck in these like 9 years, but it's like those 9 like of all the kind of time periods of British history, I feel like it's like the Tudor era people have heard of, the Victorians, and the Regency era. I feel it's maybe third place because it's just a time, and it's because of Jane Austen, I think,
Yeah. So
because she's so well known and her books were written then, and most of the adaptations take place in that time period. But we'll talk about that when
yes,
we can talk
indeed.
about this movie.
Yeah, because I feel like us Americans are a little bit more like stunted in our understanding of like what regions were which, and we just think everything is the Victorian. We have no concept of manners or fashion or ways of life outside of just like, yes, Queen Victoria and all of that. And I feel like thankfully, we have the fictional adaptations of things taking place in the Regency. Again, Jane Austen and modern Netflix adaptations of romance novels that we have a better understanding, maybe, but I think it often does get called like, they're Victorian morals. And it's like, no, entirely different morality set, believe it or not.
Well, and that's the thing about the Regency as well. And I talk about this a lot in my book, which is just because of Jane Austen is kind of the go-to that people have heard about. And her books are not salacious. Her books are not scandalous. So there's kind of this misunderstanding that this was a time period where people were nice and polite and like you go to a ball and everything is good, where it's like, no, like the reason we don't know about the Regency is because Queen Victoria took over and she was like, I'm going to right this ship. Like the British royal family has just been like F boys and like everyone's addicted to opium and everyone's gambling all the time and there's illegitimate children everywhere. She's like, I'm going to make it rigid and the British royal family is going to be like really moral and I'm going to make England seem like that. And then retroactively, she made previous time periods seem like that so that people wouldn't know how messy it was. But what my book is showing is like how messy it was, actually.
She's like the world's greatest PR agent, basically.
She really
of just
was. Like,
like,
she was queen for so long. And then exactly like you said, like people say like, oh, the Victorian era. And people kind of say that is like the entire 1800s. For it's like, no, before she was there, like what the kings were getting up to was
messy.
yeah.
I mean, and I think that reading the book, hashtag hot Regency summer is a big part of this, because what you lay out with Caroline of Brunswick's story is, and I'm kind of surprised that you mentioned in the book that Bridgerton kind of leapfrogs over this with its storytelling, that it does not reference her. And I'm honestly shocked that nobody has taken a stab at telling the story in entertainment, because it's very much an entertaining story of a woman, young girl, that gets married off to this dude who really only wants to marry her to pay off his debts because he needs money, and believes that he'll get it if he marries, meets her for, I know it's not like 5 seconds, but it feels like 5 seconds, and is just like, her, so we need to figure out how to get rid of her. But unlike Henry VIII, everybody else likes her. And it becomes this real thing of like, they're married in name only and pretty much trying to slut shame her throughout the entirety of her reign with no real evidence of that. Even though she has a long-term lover at some point, but I'm honestly surprised that no one has felt the need to turn the story into something bigger, because it has all these very modern day tenets to it.
It absolutely does. What I know when I was first researching this, I think just like informally from myself, was I was like, surely there's a movie or something about this. And all there is there's this like 1 hour quasi acted out documentary about Caroline of Brunswick. And it came out in, I want to say, the early 90s. And I think when Princess Diana was being the scandalous Princess of Wales, people were like, oh, there was once another scandalous Princess of Wales. There was like a blip of interest where people were like, oh, she's like Diana. And then it kind of went away. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, now they can, option your book and turn your book into a film. I think that would be the way to go, Hollywood.
I think it would be the way
Hollywood
to go.
producers.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like Bridgerton's so hot right now. Like the
Mhm.
real Regency. Yeah.
Exactly. We love us like taking Regency and sexifying it. So I mean, Emerald Fennel. Your
Call me.
move, miss.
Emerald.
Okay.
No
Emerald.
lie.
I mean, I want to talk about, I'm always fascinated by people that write books that are researched like this, because I am somebody that has been told that I'm way too interested in definitive things, which when you're dealing with stuff that's so far removed and you're never going to be able to prove things. But this is a book where the belief from her husband is that she's just like banging anything with a pulse, and I mean, how did you want to approach that? What were there preconceptions or things that you wanted to prove, disprove? How did you kind of come to the assertions about that you come to in the book?
So in terms of her having allegedly had relationships with various men and having lovers, like all you can really look at are, for me, was I was looking a lot at her letters, the letters of people around who are writing. And there is, thank God, other people who are not me have like gone in the archives and like typed these things out. So I'm not reading like handwriting.
Oh, God, that would be the worst.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I've talked to people on my podcast who've had to go in and decipher like 16th century handwriting. Like, thank God. The research has been done for me. So it was just a matter of kind of looking at it and just sort of assessing what are people saying, what are people thinking is happening. And so much of it was like her husband was always trying to prove that she had had an affair because that's the only way that he could divorce her, because was how divorce law worked in England for the king at that time. And you're never going to prove that unless you like catch her in the act of having sex with somebody, and no one ever did. But it's like, well, here's what we know. And so they talked to like the maids, like who changed the sheets. Like there's so much of this, the amount of sex they were accusing her of having. And I talk about this in my book a bit. It's like, well, she would either be constantly giving birth to children, and then there was some accusations that she was, and she had all these secret children that she was secretly having, or she had some sort of contraception. And that's where I was like, okay, well, like, so that's why I started researching, well, what contraception was there, to try to figure, like, if she was having sex, either she was having a lot of babies or she knew what she was doing, how would she have known that? So then you kind of like go down all these little rabbit holes just to try to find out. So like researching her, but then you get to the broader period and it's like, well, what books were there? What was she reading? Like what knowledge would she have had? So just broadening out the scope, I think, to try to imagine what might have really happened, I guess.
That's got to be a fun conversation when people are asking you what you're working on and you're like, I'm looking at 1800s contraceptive methods and like trying to find out how young women were learning about having sex.
I'm learning about reusable condoms and how they were washed and where do you hang them out to dry, and would your servants have seen them? Because if the servants saw that he was using condoms, then that would have been evidence, but no one saw that, so that means he couldn't have been. Like, yeah, like kind of.
We don't talk about the reusable condom market in the Regency era
little
enough.
bows, little ribbons at the top.
This is not in 1940s Pride and Prejudice, by the way.
Pride and Prejudice is very, like, it's a very Hays Code Pride and Prejudice. Yeah,
it very much is. That's a good segue into talking about Pride and Prejudice in the 1940s version. For people that don't know, I don't know how you have lived in a world where you aren't aware of Pride and Prejudice. Based on the novel by Jane Austen, this tells the story of Elizabeth Bennet, played by Greer Garson, who meets the curmudgeonly Fitzwilliam Darcy, played by Larry Olivier, and their enemies to lovers plotline tends to blossom. This is a movie that is directed by the not well-known compared to somebody like George Cukor, but Robert C. Leonard, with a script by Aldous Huxley and Jane Murfin.
I was like, what?
Yeah.
Did he write other movies? What's Aldous Huxley doing here?
I want to say that Huxley did have a period of time where he did go into screenwriting, like
him and William Faulkner, where you're like, what the hell were you doing there, and who invited you to this party? But it was just like Hollywood was willing to chuck money at anybody who had a good book.
Startling. It was a startling credit for me to see.
I think most of those, we've talked about this with like Fitzgerald, like all of the great writers of that period all tried their hand at screenwriting,
You know who
And
didn't? I don't think Hemingway ever did. He was like, I'm a newsman, and he never
Hemingway
really.
very much dabbled with kind of looking at his, but he was so unreliable and
Yeah.
often just like, I think he mostly was more interested in kind of like selling off his works. I mean, I know when he did To Have and Have Not, like he was so pissed at Howard Hawks because Hawks just kept kind of selling the option and not sharing the money with Papa. He was like, what the hell is this? But in case you're curious, Aldous Huxley did write several other films for early Hollywood. This was his first screenplay, but he went on to be uncredited writer for the Madame Curie, another Greer Garson story. He also was cited as the writer of the script for Jane Eyre in 1943.
Right.
He did an uncredited rewrite on Alice in Wonderland in the 50s for Disney.
So he's like the go-to like literary adaptation.
Yeah,
guy.
kind of. And he did write a lot for, he did some stuff for TV, but he pretty much kind of backed away after the 50s. And yeah, it's a really weird little historical footnote. Yeah. For me, I mean, I wrote about this, shameless plug for my upcoming romance version of But Have You Read the Book Volume 2. I had never seen the 1940s iteration of Pride and Prejudice. It was interesting, Emily and I talked about it before we got on the air. I don't like this version, but I find it to be fascinating in how Hollywood really believed that people either A, just didn't give a crap about, we were talking about Wuthering Heights the other day, and there's all this talk about like historical accuracy with the new version. 1940, Daryl Zanuck was just like, who the hell cares?
No one cared. I love seeing like this. We'll talk about this movie and the costumes, I hope. But I love seeing pictures of like, movie versions of like Marie Antoinette or something from the 30s, and she's wearing fully just a 1930s outfit. I'm just like, you know what? Don't pretend. Why pretend? Just make it look like your time. Just go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Gowns by Adrian, by the way. And
that's what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
Adrian.
Let's just jump into Adrian really quickly, because I rank classic films mostly based on who did the costumes. And obviously best Edith Head. You've got Ori Kelly and you've got Adrian. Those are your top 3 costume designers. And when I saw Gowns by Adrian, I was like, this ain't gonna be bad, because let's be honest here, that man can make a dress.
I was looking up because I was like, Adrian, I know I've heard of Adrian, so I was being like, what else did he do? Because he's just called Adrian, it's memorable. And he had a Wizard of Oz. He's like,
yeah.
He's in his moment.
I mean, I should mention, so the reason why we get this movie, and we're going to talk about how this relates to the costumes, but we have to blame Gone with the Wind for this, as most costume
You can blame
dramas.
Gone with the Wind for so many things.
Yeah.
You really can. The hope was that they were going to adapt Austen's novel alongside a bunch of other costume dramas. This movie started out as being in production as far back as 1936. And Irving Thalberg wanted to adapt the book, of course, with his wife, Norma Shearer, as Elizabeth, and Clark Gable as Darcy.
I wouldn't
Imagine
mind that.
Yeah. And then Thalberg dies in September of that year, and they just kind of stopped dealing with the production until 1939, when everybody's good friend George Cukor was going to direct the project, which I think Cukor would have been probably the best person to do this.
Knocked it out of the park. Absolutely.
Weirdly enough, with Robert Donat as Darcy, which that's a very English choice, I will tell you that right now. And if you look at old pictures of Robert Donat, you can see where they got Laurence Olivier, because Donat kind of is similar. But Robert Z. Leonard, who had done The Great Ziegfeld and a bunch of Jeanette MacDonald musicals, was hired after Cukor left the project for some unknown reasons, and he was going to make it. Originally had considered, because Donat ended up, once Cukor left, I guess Donat was out. He also wasn't a big bankable star at that point, certainly wasn't a big MGM name, but they considered Melvin Douglas, which I was like, Melvin? Really? Robert Taylor, Too Pretty and Too American, and Errol Flynn.
I would have liked that.
Errol would have been good. Yeah, Errol would have been good. But they got Olivier. And this came out just 3 months after Olivier had played in Rebecca. And Olivier really wanted Vivien Leigh to play Lizzie Bennet.
I think that would have been great.
That would have been great. But Greer Garson was Louis B. Mayer's protege. Take that however you will. And she was supposed to be this kind of successor to Norma Shearer, this grand dame, and she got the role. I mean, Greer was 36. She was the oldest actor I think that she still holds the record as being the oldest actress to play Elizabeth Bennet, who's about 20 in the book. So all of that is to say, like, I think that the casting of this is just really bizarre. Because for me, I don't know about you guys, I'm not a Greer Garson fan. Greer Garson to me is very cold and very, like, elegant and refined. I mean, she's Mrs. Miniver, you know? So this staunch, kind of stiff upper lip, very British persona. They have her playing this kind of comedy of manners, and it just isn't working for me.
I will say, and I'm going to make myself very vulnerable here, I'm not super familiar with Laurence Olivier's work.
No worries.
And I couldn't tell him apart from the other two male leads of this movie in any scene. I couldn't tell which one was him until they said Mr. Darcy or Mr. Wickham or Mr. Bingley. They looked identical to me. Clark Gable, Errol Flynn look different, and I would have gone that way. I think especially because it's black and white and they're all dressed exactly the same. But I had some real issues just being like, which one is this? Like, I couldn't tell.
I think too, when you're getting like character actors like Edward Ashley and Bruce Lester, who were not, again, big MGM names, they were just, you know, kind of dudes that pop in. And yeah, you can look at the pictures of them next to Larry Olivier's IMDb and be like, but it's the Bridgerton principle, right? You know, like the first season of Bridgerton, everybody thought all the dudes look the same. So, you know, I'm glad to know we haven't changed that.
You know, I think there's a certain aspect of that almost works with the text because Mrs. Bennet doesn't care which one her daughter marries. She is not in it for anything aside from husband, ideally several $1,000s a month in income. She doesn't care. To an extent, the girls don't really care. They're just kind of like, oh no, we're facing this crisis of our house being entailed to our boring ass cousin. And, you know, who's going to fall on the sword and marry the cousin in order to save the house? I don't want to say, because I will get ruined by the Pride and Prejudice girlies out there, but like, it doesn't matter who Darcy is until you find out his personality. And then, you know, until they start to develop a relationship. But Mrs. Bennet, and to an extent, the daughters for the first chunk of the whole entire plot, they don't really care which one's which either.
I will say I didn't even notice the actor playing Wickham had a mustache until towards the end of the film.
And I mean,
True.
It was a very thin mustache.
It was a very pencil.
I don't know if they just hadn't had a close-up of him until then. I was like, how am I confused? He has a mustache. But yeah, still I did.
Olivier hated making this. I mean, I know we talked about he wasn't happy making Wuthering
I was about
Heights.
to ask, was he happy making any movie?
I don't know. I would be interested to do more research to find out if he enjoyed making Rebecca.
I was going to say, like, Olivia hated making this movie is not really a barometer for whether or not the movie was enjoyable to make.
I think Olivier hated being the MGM contract star. Like, he did not want to be the hot, like, English guy that they hired when they needed a hot English guy. And I think that from what I'd read, his issues with this were that the part had no meat to it, you know, that he was just kind of staunch and I don't think he knew how to work with.
That's because you're second fiddle to Lizzie, and Darcy actually doesn't have that much going on until the last quarter of the movie.
And I also don't think Olivier is good at being funny.
No.
And this is a far more comedic interpretation than anything he had done before, and I would say after. So I think that for him, you know, maybe he was just a dude that understood his strengths and his weaknesses and was just like, I'm gonna be garbage in this movie, so I'm not gonna enjoy making it.
Can we go back to Adrian for a second?
Yes.
I was going to say, we need to discuss.
I believe, and this is probably what you're going to say, Kristen, and I know you know more. You've clearly done more research than I have. I read the IMDb trivia, and I did see that they used leftover costumes from Gone with the Wind for this film. So that's part of why they're all in hoop skirts. Like, it's a very 1830s aesthetic. It's not a Regency. It's not a 1811.
We talked about this with Wuthering Heights, which is similar. Has similar costuming, and from what I've read from that and this was the belief that at least in this case they reused the Gone with the Wind costumes not only because it was cheaper, but because they felt that, or at least Daryl Zanuck, I think, was the one who said that he felt that the Regency era costumes were too plain and also too salacious because they're more body hugging than other things. So that's one of many Hays Code choices that they made, was to make and he felt that it was just better for the eye, like it's great to see all the frippery. You're not going to get all of that with just a bunch of chicks in like muslin, dresses with little puff sleeves and whatnot.
Honestly, especially in black and white, like it would have, I think, it's like this one's light pink and this one's light blue. It would all just look like, oh, they're all just wearing the same thing. Like, I think for a black and white film, it does make sense.
Hat game was strong in this, though. They rocked some
hats
bonnets.
were amazing. The bonnets were like a foot off their head.
It was incredible. You put a bird in those. They were enormous. So many flowers. But I also read that they didn't plan on shooting this in black and white. They had planned on shooting it in color, and that the sets were actually quite like extravagant, but they just couldn't find any color film.
Because Gone with the Wind used all the film.
That's
what I read.
Yeah.
Gone with the Wind ruins everything, doesn't it?
Incredible in this, though.
From minute one, the very first scene, they're in I think a milliner's shop, and I'm just like, oh, these are some hats.
I'm glad that they did actually. One thing that I genuinely like about this movie is that one of the things that actually bothers me a little bit about the one with Keira Knightley, the adaptation that came out, when we were younger, is that they often show the Bennets as like destitute, and they're not. They're just kind of like lower end landed people, like there's no sons to inherit the property, but it's not like they were like struggling to put food on the table.
It's not Sense and Sensibility or anything like that.
So I think that, like, despite the fact that the trappings of wealth that are shown in this film are not of the correct era, it does a good job of showing you that, like, Mrs. Bennet is wailing constantly that they'll never be able to live and that they're all going to die and that they're all going to starve to death. But that's not entirely accurate to like their concept of wealth, if that makes sense.
Special guest co-star Hepburn Foster, who did watch the film with me. Actually, she slept through most of it.
I mean, fair. But I know that we were talking about how undistinct the men look in this movie, but the women, the various Bennet sisters, all look pretty, I would say, pretty distinct from each other, and that's because they were using pretty much every young, up-and-coming MGM star of the late 1930s. So you get like, Heather Angel is playing Kitty. The lovely and adorable Marcia Hunt is playing Mary, the smart one.
Just a thankless role.
It's a
she was
thankless
good.
role, but
she was good.
She makes a meal. Anne Rutherford is Lydia, and Maureen O'Sullivan, who, if you always needed like a sweet young character, Maureen O'Sullivan was Jane in the Tarzan movies.
I don't think I've ever seen Maureen O'Sullivan, or no, I don't know if I've ever seen her in black and white because she's famously redhead. And in this film, it makes it, just because of the black and white film, it makes it look like she has like black hair. I'm like, it's interesting because Jane Bennet in film is always blonde. So it's interesting to me that she was.
That
she
is
looked
interesting.
Dark.
Yeah. I just know her from being in The Thin Man, where she plays Dorothy Wyman in The Thin Man, and she sets that whole thing off. So I always compare her to that whenever I hear that voice, because it's a very cutesy little voice. And I love the fact that almost all the sisters have these super like high-pitched, very girly voices. And then you have Greer Garson come in, who's just I'm going to command the room. And I know she's too old to be playing the role, but I really liked her in it. I did.
I think it's really interesting how in 1930s, 1940s literary adaptations, how the casting of the actress really does change the dynamic of the sisterhood in these movies. I have the same issue with this as I do with something like 1949's Little Women, which, because Jane Austen was so much older as Jo, and Margaret O'Brien was I think 14. Liz Taylor was closer in age. They changed the kind of the order of the sisters, and so like Beth is the youngest instead of Amy. Here, because Greer looks like a woman, and everybody else looks more like, young women in their 20s, it does give Elizabeth Bennet this air of not being an old maid, but almost like being the bigger sister, which makes her desire not to marry all the more paramount in the book, or in the film.
So there's this thing that happened that I wonder if they were playing with. After World War I, especially in Great Britain, there was a crisis that they considered called the surplus women. And because so many men died in World War I, specifically in Great Britain, but also to an extent America and all of Europe, there was this panic that there would not be enough men to go around to actually marry off all the women who survived. And I do wonder if putting a 36-year-old woman in the role of Lizzie Bennet really kind of harkened back to, for people watching the film, of like this panic of the unattached single woman who was an adult. Because again, then, like it was after World War I, women either belonged to their father or their husbands, and this absolute moral panic that there would be a woman who did not belong to someone and could not be reined in by a male attachment would still be in the zeitgeist of people watching the movie in 1939 or 1940.
Yeah, it definitely it's hilarious to conjure up the concept of like women thinking, women being single.
But at the end, I guess as a spoiler, when Lady Catherine goes like, you need a woman who will tell you no. That's why I think it's okay for you to marry her. And there's this huge like romantic, it's a rom-com essentially at the end where they're like, what you need is a mouthy broad to tell you no. And Darcy's like, hell yeah, I am so into this. Like, it's a really comical sort of like turn on its head for society that you would want that Darcy, who's the most powerful man in this tiny little hamlet of England, is like, what I really want is not a dumb little girl, but a woman who tells me no. That's what turns me on. That's what melted my ice. And it's like, that's a really powerful thing for like a grown man to be like, I want a grown woman who's going to tell me what to do. Like, that's a really powerful thing to see in 1940.
And this movie was really popular. That's what I read. That it really, and I think potentially it's part of where Laurence Olivier's career as hot British guy really took off between this and Wuthering Heights, I guess. But like this really popularized, like I just read that people started reading Pride and Prejudice. Like it got people really excited about this book and about Jane Austen. And that's really interesting. Because I was like, this movie was not very, what's the nice word? Interesting.
Yeah.
But it would not have caught my attention otherwise if I wasn't watching it for this. So just picturing people going to the theater and being so excited about it. They're like, I'm going to read the source material. I'm like all in on Jane Austen. Like, that's really interesting. So maybe stuff like that like really made it feel pertinent to people. Like the watching a 36-year-old woman, melting this guy's heart. Yeah.
I mean, they made a lot of changes to the text because it was so kind of, the book is so deep rooted in class, and Huxley and Jane Murfin, they didn't really want to adapt the book so much as adapt Helen Jerome's stage adaptation. So that, I guess, was a more lighter, frothier costume drama, which the studio really did sell as a romantic comedy, The film's tagline is "Bachelors beware. 5 gorgeous beauties are on a madcap hunt." And you're like, what movie are we watching? And they market at the beginning, the text crawl is like in Old England, which just is supposed to set up like, this regular time. And you really do watch this with the costumes and all of that. This book takes place in this weird past time. Is it the antebellum South? Well, no, but it's this weird like unknown time. And I think what I always find, Anne said the movie, the interest wanes with this adaptation. And I think that's because within the first scene or two, every major character is introduced in the film, including Wickham, which we know, the book really takes its time bringing everybody together. I think that is what makes the movie feel a lot longer. I mean, it's a 2-hour film, compared to something like Wuthering Heights, which is about an hour 45.
Well, and I feel like maybe that's part of where I couldn't tell the men apart because you met them all at the same time. If there's one guy and I got to know him and then a new character came, I'd be like, well, no, that's not that. But if you're like, here's 6 men, I'm like, which is who?
Yeah. There were title cards at the beginning where they were introducing the cast. They go through like the top level cast, and then there's a secondary thing where they tell you every single character and who's playing them. And it's like 40 people. Like, it's an extensive list of casting. And we're used to, especially movies of this time, where it's like if it's more than 4 people named characters, like that's an absolutely astronomical cast list. It was so many people.
Actually, I want to say, speaking of the Antebellum and Gone with the Wind, I was like, oh, Mrs. Bennet, that's Aunt Pitty Pat from Gone with the Wind.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not. But is it? But it's not. But it's like,
it's not a different accent. It's the same one, I think.
like it basically is Aunt Pitty Pat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Same little curls. I
think Mary Boland. Well, I'm going to double check this right now. We're going to figure this out. No, she's not Aunt Pitty Pat, but it's similar vibe. So
really seems like Aunt Pitty Pat.
Exactly. I mean, well, and I think too, a lot of the other changes that the book goes through, that the film goes through, I mean, are all about the Hays Code, So Mr. Collins in this version is a librarian. He's not a clergyman.
I thought that was very interesting, because was that just, you couldn't have a clergy person
You couldn't criticize religion.
Yeah, so you just couldn't even make a clergyman be annoying.
No. Yeah. And I think what's funny is that the humor derived from Mr. Collins in the book has nothing to do with him being a clergyman, but because he's just a snob. But, okay, go figure. And that, I think, is one of those things where you're watching this movie and it really does become this kind of comedy of manners. And I think one of the fundamental failings of this movie, and maybe I'm in the minority on it, is that I just don't think Darcy and Lizzie Bennet in this movie have any chemistry. I don't feel Larry Olivier and Greer Garson like each other.
Well, that's part of where I also feel like I couldn't tell the men apart, because I should be like, oh, these are the two leads of the film interacting, and this is the banter that I'm here for. I was like, okay, and then it's like, oh, that was Wickham. Oh, okay. When Darcy and Lizzie are together, you should be like, yeah, it's Darcy and Lizzie, and like this is it. Like these are the leads of the film. But yeah, they were just kind of two genteel people saying lines to each other.
I feel like the screwball comedy kind of ruined this movie for a lot of people. The fact that you had like Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn and Bringing Up Baby and these kind of characters that are at odds. The belief is that Lizzie and Darcy are the same thing. And they're really not. There's this whole other, there's these levels to a screwball comedy that must be met in order for that dynamic to work. It just doesn't work. It doesn't translate here. It just does not translate.
No, I think that's probably, I don't know. I can't stand Pride and Prejudice. I really can't. So I liked this version over other versions that I've seen because they were trying to do screwball, which is like generally my favorite version of, movie romance category. I'm just not a romantic person. I just don't like romance. But like, I don't know. I can see why people don't like it, because like if you want the book experience on screen, you're not going to get that. And like, but there were changes that were made that I really appreciated. I like the fact that Greer Garson was older. I like the fact that there's the ending. I appreciate the fact that there was any semblance of comedy whatsoever, because like I feel like people have a tendency to turn Pride and Prejudice into this like really melodramatic drama that's all about feelings, which it's like not really. There are comedic moments, and Jane Austen was not writing something that was necessarily like heavy, like romantic saga. It's about people, and I feel like the comedic aspects of the movie make it more about people than it does other things. And excuse me for a second, my cat is destroying my couch. Feel free to carry on without me.
Well, I think too, you look at again more of the changes from the book, and the movie does fall into this real screwball trope when it isn't trying to kind of fall into the established melodrama. So like in the book, when Lady Catherine de Bourgh, the Edna May Oliver character, is testing or is talking to Elizabeth Bennet, her whole thing is like, well, if, he gets married to you, then I'm going to disinherit him. And that's not a threat. That's facts. Whereas in the movie, like Lady Catherine de Bourgh is on their side, and it's more like a test of whether Elizabeth Bennet is a fortune hunter or not.
I liked that woman. I like that Lady Catherine de Bourgh. I was like, she's like olden days Carol Burnett was her vibe to me.
Edna May Oliver is unsung gem. We don't celebrate
There's
her
a lot of
enough.
chin work happening.
Exactly.
I liked that twist. I appreciate that twist of like she wasn't really being mean to Lizzie Bennet. She was just testing on behalf of Darcy. I was like, oh, that's cute. That's a nice way to kind of soften that character, I guess.
Yeah, the book is such a big novel of class, and how do you make that interesting for an audience? And I think by taking it to that screwball world, I mean, I don't think it's as successful as it could be, but I appreciate the effort that is put into it.
Especially because if you're making it ostensibly for an American audience, we don't have the same understanding of class that they do even today in the United States, in the United Kingdom. It just simply is not the same. If you were trying to make it, that I know that a lot of Pride and Prejudice sort of like reworkings and retellings do now, you'll make it about race, you'll make it about gender, you'll make it about other things, because we just simply do not have the same understanding of class, of a rigid class structure that this book is about, but also that like it would require you to know. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons why, in something like the Keira Knightley version, you've got Darcy walking around in proper regal attire, and you've got Lizzie running around like in homespun. And it's just like, yeah, that's not the same, but that's the only like visual clue that we have that they would be of differing, substantial enough different class, is that you have to make the Bennets look like they're slopping pigs in the morning before they get caught, by Darcy in some place where they shouldn't be, because we just simply do not have, the American audience does not have the understanding of the rigid class structure of the time, or the UK, to not have those sorts of things. So when you're looking at them and the bonnets and the gowns, and you're going like, what do you mean you're not of the same class of Darcy? Like, that doesn't make sense to us, because when we see bonnets and gowns, we just assume rich. So you need that sort of frowning aspect. You need someone in the society to tell you that they are not the same. And the only way to really do that is by making fun of them pretty hard.
Yeah.
This movie was a mild success. It did lose MGM about $240,000, but they continued on making literary adaptations. So it wasn't a deal breaker. Of course, Greer Garson, Larry Olivier went on to great careers. This only got one Oscar nomination at the time for Cedric Gibbons' art direction.
I was going to say, for Adrian?
No, for I don't know if they would have been able to be nominated because the costumes were
It was just Gone with the
recycled.
Wind costumes, yeah.
Exactly. But the set design the art direction was nominated. Did not win, but it's I love me some Cedric Gibbons. I'm gonna name one of my cats that or something down the line. But I mean, overall, it's not my favorite. It's not my favorite. It's never gonna be. But I do have an appreciation for what it was attempting to accomplish. And I think talking it out with you two has made me reevaluate some things. So thank you for that.
I think
go on.
Oh no, I was just gonna say like because you're both coming with such a strong like understanding of like the screwball comedy element and stuff. I feel like I would have liked it to go harder in that direction, because I didn't realize they were trying to do that. But I think it's because what Emily said, like most Pride and Prejudice, like the Keira Knightley one or the Colin Firth one, like there's comedic moments, but they're really like romantic dramas. And that's kind of the world I usually imagine Pride and Prejudice being in. So the fact that this was different is interesting. I would have loved, so much of it is casting. Like if you had in the cast, like if you had Katharine Hepburn or I don't know, Cary Grant, or like someone who like could play up the banter and the dialogue, like to give it that energy, because it's like they're trying to do a screwball, but you cast Laurence Olivier. So like, of course that's not going to work.
Yeah.
But I agree. I appreciate that they were trying.
Yeah, the seriousness of the Olivier gets mixed up with the screwball. Like, it's one of those situations where I'm like, I'm sorry, you got your seriousness in my comedy. I do think Cary Grant would be great. Oh my god, missed opportunity there to have him do something.
Yeah, I think it's so funny because they do play up certain facts, like Kitty and Lydia are played like so tacky in this. They're farcically tacky. Like girls would know not to be that drunk and that silly and that dumb and that boy crazy like of the era. And you have Miss Bingley sort of turning up her nose constantly at these these girls. And I just think that that was such a wonderful source of comedy. But unfortunately, like a lot of the casting doesn't lend itself to being particularly funny or as heightened as it actually needs to be in order to pull off the comedy that I think might have actually been written, which also Aldous Huxley, not known for being a yuck a minute guy. So he
Yeah.
might have been shooting a little high.
There's
With
a
intention.
a perfect storm of like casting, writing. Like you just don't have the right people there to fire this movie off like as it should have been, as
it's
it could have
hard.
been.
It's hard to. It makes you wonder if there is this kind of fundamental misunderstanding of the book because you have all these serious people that are congregating for this movie, and yet Austen's book, or at least the Helen Jerome stage play that they're borrowing from, seems so frothy and light that you need a Cukor, you need a Preston Sturges, you need somebody that's got that deft hand that can give you a little bit of seriousness, but can still play with the humor of it. And
Mhm.
at a certain point, you're watching it and you're like, God, everybody's just like, that's associated with this is so frowny face. Like, not really clear where they think they're going to get that.
That's, I think, why I was so excited when, what was her name? The old-timey Carol Burnett. What was her name? Lady Catherine.
Catherine.
Edna May Oliver.
When she came in, I was like, yes, love your energy. Or the guy who played Mr. Collins, I'm like, yes, thank you, side character who probably came from the vaudeville stage. Like, these are people coming in with the energy, and with energy.
Yeah,
instead
with
of just
energy.
like pathos. Like, I appreciated them.
Yeah, agreed.
Emily, final thoughts on Pride and Prejudice?
No, I think I liked it more than both of you did, but partially because I'm less attached to Pride and Prejudice as a book than most people are. I think, like, again, they're sniffing at the edges of making it of when we always say Jane Austen wrote social satire. I think they were leaning more towards our modern concept of satire, which is that it's supposed to be like LOL funny, and they didn't get there entirely. The repartee was barbed, but it could have been sharper. And like, swung and they missed. They swung and they hit a single, is what I would say for this. Like, they didn't knock it out of the park, but they got on base. And I think if you love Pride and Prejudice, and especially if you love hand flexing and Wet Darcy, you're going to freaking hate this movie and skip it. You don't need it. You don't need to add it to your arsenal if there's things you already love.
But you know what you should add to your arsenal? Anne Foster's book, Rebel of the Regency. Yes.
Yeah. You know what that's got? It's Regency era dresses. Even on the cover, that's very diaphanous looking. Very like Hays Code. Couldn't wear that. Yeah.
Exactly. But listeners, let us know your thoughts on Pride and Prejudice, diaphanous gowns, whatever. You can email it to us.
Bonnets.
Hats and bonnets. Email it to us at ticklishbiz@gmail.com, or we are on all social media, including at ticklishbiz, unless it is Twitter, where we are at ticklish_biz. I would love to thank Anne Foster once again for jumping on the podcast and talking to us. Anne, where can fans find you? Anything coming up over the next few weeks that they should be on the lookout for?
So what I would point everybody to is just rebeloftheregency.com, which is a website for my book and for myself. So there you've got all the links. You can buy this book in any English-speaking country in the world, basically. There's also an audiobook, there's an ebook, and it's just been published. And I'm going to be doing a couple of events, and those are also listed at rebeloftheregency.com. And that's the main thing I'm here. I have a podcast called Vulgar History. You can listen to that. But like, time is of the essence, like rebeloftheregency.com. Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome.
We love it. We support it. So definitely buy your copies wherever you get your books. Awesome. That's going to close out Ticklish Business for this episode. As always, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch our episodes now. If you are watching on our YouTube channel, we thank you so much. If you aren't, head over to our YouTube channel. Just search for Ticklish Business and be sure to share, subscribe, like, do all that, and we appreciate it. You can also find us over at patreon.com/ticklishbiz, where we give you all sorts of fun stuff, including these episodes 2 days early. It starts at just $1, and it helps keep the lights on over here. You can find me over at all social media platforms at Kristen K. Lopez, unless it's Instagram, where I am at Kristen Lopez 88. My site, The Film Maven, is at thefilmmaven.com, where I give movie reviews and talk about the entertainment industry. And I have a bunch of books. My next book, But Have You Read the Book, Volume 2, Romance Edition, comes out July 28th. You can pre-order that wherever you are pre-ordering books. I have a link that I'll be posting on all of my socials. And I have my book, Popcorn Disabilities, about disability in film, out now. You can buy that wherever you're buying your books these days. Emily Edwards, where are you on the internet? What's going on?
Blue Sky and Instagram at Ms. Emily Edwards or at MsEmilyEdwards.com. I'm still newslettering, though not as frequently as I was. But that's still coming out. I also have 3 mystery books out now. It's the Girl Friday Mysteries, starting with Viviana Valentine Gets Her Man. Those are available in ebook, audiobook, which is super great because the narrator for that is phenomenal. And I think that hardcovers are still available for the majority of them as well. Let's keep it in print if we can. Yay!
Yes.
And I'm working on more books as we speak. So if you do want to know all about those, feel free to follow me on social media, pretty much everywhere at the handle Ms. Emily Edwards.
Yay! We will be back with a new episode soon. Till then.